Hey all, Maddox here. My heart's filled with loathing. A long time ago when I was just a little kid, I wanted nothing more than to make games. In the first and second grade, I always drew what I thought they'd be like, every day some new ambition. Of course, I never actually knew how to make them. In my mind, it was all the same as the tutorials that came with Game Maker 8.1. But I didn't realize that just yet, so my heart was filled with youthful glee when I stumbled upon the OUYA. A console that will let anybody make games for it. That's me! I'm anybody! This little box would make all my dreams come true. I was ecstatic when I got a pre-order for one for my birthday. I mean, finally, making games was at my fingertips. With hindsight, we know that the OUYA was a complete disaster. It was a bad console by a poorly run company that was dead on arrival. While I was blissfully unaware of the public reception, my letdown came from the realization that being theoretically capable of developing games for a console still didn't mean I actually knew how to make them. I don't really get what I expected, but, well, you know how you think at that age. That was 11 years ago. Now the OUYA's long dead, everybody's moved on, and I'm left here, alone, with a grudge. But things are different now. I've gone to college, gotten a computer science degree, learned how to design, program, model, animate, and compose. I can make games. I do make games. So now, it's just between you and me, OUYA, and I'm gonna get even. The timing couldn't be better. Whether through nostalgia, morbid curiosity, or some form of collective madness, anniversary game jams for the console are held every September. That gives me 4 weeks to work with, though I'll shoot for the 22nd as my release date to give myself some cushion. It's not a lot of time to make a proper game, but with some careful management, I think it'll do. And yes, I am seriously going to work on an OUYA game, full-time, for over 3 weeks in the year of our Lord 2024. That's the commitment to the bit you subscribe for. Let's get cracking. Sun Tzu once said to know your enemy. I don't think he was talking about the OUYA, but we should probably do some research anyway. That last group of OUYA holdouts have launched a replacement for the old download servers, so we can have a look at how other games handled the hardware. 2D games fare decently enough, it makes sense. 3D ones have a much worse time. Some handle it pretty well, but most don't. They tend to look quite rough and struggle to maintain any solid frame rate. It might not turn out as bad as it seems, but this is not a promising start. Now's a good time to set up a development environment. Thankfully, that's dead simple for the OUYA. Given that it's literally just Android tablet hardware in a box, all we really need to do is grab a version of Unity that can build for Android Jelly Bean and configure the project accordingly. That's good. I like working with Unity, and this makes a PC port trivial. For all the OUYA's faults, deploying to it is nice and simple. The console hosts a page on your local network. Here, let me just fix that for you. Then you can drop the build right in there, and it'll take care of the rest for you. If you want it done even faster, you can connect to it with USB and start builds straight from Unity. That said, this performance is indeed unimpressive. Even with a single model on screen, we can't hit 60 FPS. It really struggles if we add more, but dropping the resolution to 720p keeps it above 30 with decent enough headroom. 720p 30 isn't uncommon for something like an Xbox 360, so I'm willing to settle for it. That gives us a max poly count of around 86,000. That seems workable enough. So, what are we making? Well, if the goal is just to make something that's technically a game and that runs on the OUYA, that's easy. I mean, I can do that in 20 minutes. No. I gotta do right by my past self. My ambitions weren't constrained by silly ideas like technical limitations or reality. Whatever I make, it has to be legit, not conceptually kneecapped to fit the hardware. This seems like a good opportunity to revisit an old idea of mine. A few years back, I got really into PlanetSide 2 for a bit, and my favorite thing in it was the Ambusher jump jets. They're a type of jetpack that launch you forward and up in one big boost. I don't know if they're like the meta or anything, but you can do a lot of cool underhanded stuff with them, and they're just a fun way to get around. I thought it'd be interesting to combine it with some Tribe-style skiing mechanics, and I threw together a quick prototype, but that's as far as the idea ever went. So what if, right, we take that, sprinkle some time trial stuff on top, and have ourselves a nice little speedrunning FPS. And I'll call it, Avenge Myself, because that's basically what I'm doing and it sounds cool. I take my ideas, write up a loose design document with the features I have in mind, and set progress deadlines to pace myself on, knowing full well that I won't follow them at all. I can't wait for everything to go exactly according to plan and to make precisely the game that I am imagining at this moment. Alright, let's get a move on. First things first, I spent a couple hours on a basic version of the movement controller and dropped into a test map. And immediately, it's kind of fun to move around. You can run, jump, boost, stomp, and skate, and chaining it all together feels satisfying. I mean, it's floaty and super jank, but it gives me some confidence in the basic idea. That said, it seems like you can go a lot faster than I expected. It should be fine though, I can work out the details later. The next day I go ahead and get it running on the OUYA. Now there's an OUYA SDK for Unity, and the theoretically working version of it does exist, but in my experience it just breaks everything, so I won't be using it. That leaves me with the crappy old Unity input system and this thing's bizarre mapping, so it takes some finagling to have usable controls. Once it's all up and running, well, it works. Honestly, it feels pretty terrible, but that's just because this controller sucks. Would you believe that using cheap 2013 Bluetooth to connect to a tablet receiver in a metal box doesn't go well? Seriously, tipping the OUYA on its side so that the plastic top faces the controller genuinely makes the connection better. I'm not kidding. Anyway, the next few days go by in a blur. I'm getting stuff done, man! We got a HUD, level timers, all the movement features are in and feeling great. Breakable glass, very important. And it's at this point that I realize two things. First, this is nothing like PlanetSide anymore. I mean, the boost works the same as it does there, but skating lets you gain way more speed, and boosting slows you down if you're already going faster than it sets you to, so it's more of a crutch and a fallback option. Actually, this almost plays more like a 2D Sonic the Hedgehog game where you're throwing momentum around with level geometry. I very much meant for this to be a shooter first and foremost, but if it keeps going in this direction, that's not gonna happen. Second, dang, this is way more fun! I'm spending a good chunk of my time just zooming around the map going as fast as I can, and I can't get enough of it. Seems great to speedrun too. You can play off the map in tons of different ways, and the skill ceiling feels pretty high. So like, this has to be the game now, right? I mean, screw the design doc, I'm all in on this. It does change some things though. I decided to simplify combat way down, since stopping to fight enemies would be a total buzzkill. Now everything is a one-hit kill, and the gun aims for you with an oh so satisfying crosshair. Your weapon was going to be a shotgun, but if it's gonna lock on anyway, best make it a laser for consistency. I should probably work on enemies, but I kinda don't feel like it right now, so instead I add the obligatory floating and spinning time pickups and a goal so you can play this like it's an actual level. And that's the first version I hand off to some friends, and well, a happy accident happened. So my test map is this sort of open playground I kept adding more to as more movement stuff entered the picture, just so I can make sure it all worked right. When I added time pickups, I scattered them all over the place, and as a test I made where you had to collect a portion of them to open the goal. My friends download the build and they enjoy the movement, but then they start actually speedrunning it, and it turns out that a non-linear map like this actually enables a lot of interesting routing. When there isn't a clear fastest way to get to the end, you have to come up with one yourself. I really like the sandboxy feel of that. I'll keep it in mind for later. I get back to business, add in some placeholder enemies, and have a cursed thought that would soon bring me immense suffering. Hey, wouldn't it be neat if you could skate on walls? And really, if you're skating on walls, and we're going for the whole Sonic thing, gotta have loops, right? So I spend the day doing that, and it works, but then there's another problem. See, the way a first-person character controller usually handles looking is by just rotating the camera left or right for lateral input, and forward and back for vertical input. It's nice, simple, feels intuitive, and completely breaks down when you're going through a loopy-loop. Generally, you want that rotation to be happening relative to the orientation of the world, but not if you're running around at the speed of sound, got places to go, gotta follow my rainbow. It's even more severe when you're going straight up or down a wall, since then you're looking straight towards the problem zone the entire time. That's no good. If I'm gonna have wall riding, then a speed highway building run is non-negotiable. I experimented with it, trying different solutions. At one point you could hold the button to look straight in the direction you were moving, but nothing short of an overhaul to the look code would suffice. I'm not gonna bore you with the details, and just say it wasn't fun. But it works, turned out fine in the end, feels a-okay, and it only took me like 2 entire days. And with that, the core gameplay is essentially done. Things are going well. I like how it plays, doesn't seem horribly broken, life is good. But I don't have any actual content yet. It's time to make some levels. So, level design's like my thing, right? You know, making maps is the thing I do. It should theoretically go fine here. But it occurs to me that the player can now go really fast. That may screw me over a little bit. To explain why, let's go on a tangent real quick and talk about Sonic. I swear I'm capable of talking about other things, it just comes up a lot, okay? In 2007, Sega released Sonic Unleashed, and introduced a new style of gameplay for the series nicknamed the Boost Formula. It has a few ups and downs, but the important thing is that it means my boy's speed went from relatively fast to absolutely insane. Critics liked it, fans liked it, and all was well. Except for the fact that 80% of the game was spent in slow and tedious Warhog stages that everyone hates. Running through all the awesome Sonic stages takes like 30 minutes. That's odd. A few years later, they released Sonic Colors, and the Boost formula is once again a lot of fun, but now most of the game is 2D platforming. And then comes Generations, where you finally spend plenty of time with the boost formula, and the game is like 3 hours long. Okay, what's happening here? Well, when you go really fast, you travel really far. So unless you want your levels to be 30 seconds long, they need to be bigger. Like a lot bigger. To demonstrate, let's look at Green Hill Zone Act 2 from Sonic Generations. This level takes about 2 minutes to complete if you know what you're doing, maybe 3 if you don't. Here's an overhead view of the level geometry, and for clarity, I'll just mark the route you take through it. Now, for scale, this is the entire map of GTA Vice City. You see the problem here. Making giant maps is difficult and time-consuming. You can get away with less fine details since you'll be flying past them most of the time, but if you can stop, it still needs to be at least presentable up close. Which puts me at an impasse, because as much as I'd like to have a bunch of very pretty levels, I just don't have the resources to do that. With the time I've got, I figure I can do one of two things. Either I make 2 stages that look kind of okay, but still not great because this has to run on the OUYA, or I give up on visuals entirely and make 5. I'm going to do that one. Lighting and skyboxes are quick and can set a rough vibe, but at the end of the day, this is gonna be Concrete City. But all is not lost for the presentation. I knew I wouldn't have the time or skills to make a soundtrack for this myself, and after asking around and trying some things out, the absolute champ Pascal Van Boss offered to let me use his album Midnight Jungle Type 1.5 in the project. And man, I am glad for that. The music fits like a glove and I can't imagine the game without it. I'll gush more about it as we go on, but the album's linked in the description. Go show some love. So with my standards lowered and my heart aflame, I started churning out stages. Let's go on a little tour, shall we? First up, we've got Point of Contact. I obviously had to have a tutorial, but I didn't want to dedicate an entire level to that, so I figured I'd just make it the intro of this stage. Honestly, it's not great. The tutorial text is just kind of slapped onto the screen, and without a good sense of scale, I was playing everything by ear. Eventually, I decided to add in a shortcut route right at the beginning, and it went a long way towards making this opening less boring. After that, we transitioned into a more typical stage, and this is where things got tricky. I'm used to making maps for existing games, and that has some benefits. Mainly, you have a lot of level design to use as a point of reference. If you know what a good Halo mission looks like, it's not too hard to picture a new one. But, there are no Avenge Myself missions. I'm starting from square one here, so I need to decide what I want. Well, speaking of Sonic, we can start there. As far as 3D goes, there are basically 2 schools of thought. The Sonic Adventure style and the Boost Formula style. The former emphasizes platforming and while broadly linear, often provides a handful of ways to get through each section and lets you do whatever you want as far as movement's concerned. The latter is a lot more controlled. The focus is put on execution and spectacles, so courses are narrowed down to a dedicated main route and a few preordained shortcuts. On the subject of time attack games, we can also look at Trackmania. In Sonic terms, those games are in line with the Boost Formula level design. They're all about slowly perfecting the intended route rather than making your own. Now, I enjoy the Boost Formula and Trackmania, but I don't think that kind of strictness is what I want here. Thinking back to the test map, the most fun part of that wasn't running the same route over and over, it was experimenting with the movement to find faster paths. So I'm leaning closer to Sonic Adventure 1 level design, stages that offer a linear sequence of non-linear sandboxes so that routing is just as important as execution. I want the player to have to think through the space and come up with a strategy rather than just doing the obviously correct thing over and over until they finally nail it. With that in mind, I get to work in Blender. I don't like doing my level design work in modeling software like this. I find it much slower and more cumbersome than blockouts with in-engine tools, but given this game's need for smooth curves and clean collision, I don't have much of a choice. On the bright side, I did get a lot better at it by doing this, so that's a plus. For the middle section, I ended up with this series of rooftops. After a big ramp to give you speed on the way in, the first building splits the path between the next 2. If you go left, you end up on this building with a simple wall right to introduce you to the mechanic, while the right is a more straightforward path. Either way, you come to a jump leading to the outer wall. If you don't have much speed, you'll land on the lower platform and have to make your way up, but if you held onto enough from the ramp earlier, you can skip straight to the top. You'll notice that there are a lot of time pickups and enemies around here. I ended up using these as a way to balance routes against one another. If you have 2 routes, and one is obviously a lot faster than the other, then there's not really any decision to be made. Having them both be reasonable options on their own would require them to be about the same length, which would be an annoying constraint on level design, so time bonuses are a good way to even them out a little. It occurs to me that enemies in this FPS basically ended up being time pickups that you click on, but it works out well enough in the end. After the middle section, we get this big tunnel to flex the character controller and give the player tons of speed leading into the finale, where these floating roads wrap all around some buildings. If you stay on the initial path, you get the scenic route, but hopping off lets you pick between a couple of roads below. If you're really sneaky, you can even skip the roads entirely, but I'll let you figure that one out. For presentation, I went for an early morning vibe. You know, that magical little window of time. The sun's just starting to rise and everything's awash in a pale blue, but all the streetlights are still on. I always liked that. The song that plays on this stage is called High Spec, and it really brings it together. It's just relaxed enough for a tutorial, but it has enough energy to groove to while grinding out better times. Wayfinder Canal, because they can't all be winners. This is my least favorite stage in the game by a wide margin. I decided that I wanted to bring back the fully non-linear structure from the dev map to add some variety, but it turns out that's pretty hard to design for when you're like trying to make it good on purpose. What I ended up with is kind of an aimless mess of a stage that I'm just not very satisfied with. If I had more time, I'd do a pretty extensive redesign of it, but it's not so bad to justify being cut from the game, so it's just kind of here, I guess. Maybe you'll like it, I don't know. At least the music's good enough to pull the weight of the dull vibes. Terminal Ascent is very odd. When I was making boost pads for Wayfinder Canal, I had the realization that they could be used to fight gravity while skating up a wall, and the dark idea of a level where you just go stupidly high crept into my mind. Honestly, making it went the best out of any of these stages. I envisioned this enormous tower in a huge basin in the middle of nowhere, and then I just kinda made that. You start underground at the base of the structure, and then loop your way up the basin before entering the tower and firing yourself up the central shaft. Then you take a detour around the outside and finish on a huge spiral into the sky. Yeah, that was that was almost a lot worse. It wasn't intentional, but this actually ended up skewing kinda closer to boost formula level design than the other stages do. There's a really fun shortcut where you can climb the shaft from the very bottom, and the upper detour is different depending on which side you wanted to climb on, but even so, it's easily the most linear map in the game. It's just tricky to avoid with this concept. When you're relying on boost pads to keep your speed going up walls, it's difficult to take any other routes. Still, I like how it turned out. It's probably the fastest paced stage in the game, and making your way up the tower at sunset manages to feel genuinely cool. Its music is a great fit too. This is the only stage in the game that's just pure platforming with no enemies, and the song has a driven but not like combative feel to it that really meshes great with that. Midnight Skyline. Yeah, at some point I just started naming these like Sonic stages. This might be my favorite map in the game. Where Wayfinder Canal's implementation of the nonlinear objective was aimless, Midnight Skyline feels really tight and focused, with a tangled knot of interweaving routes that just feel great to bounce between. The other stage has areas that are never really worth the time to visit, but I don't think any of this one feels auxiliary, and it makes routing an extremely interesting and flexible puzzle to solve. Whatever the fastest route for this stage is, I'm sure 10 others are almost as fast and look completely different. Continuing our little day-night cycle, this stage takes place at, well, yeah. And this is one of those situations where just having a skybox and nice lighting can really sell a mood, even when every surface has the same concrete texture. But as always, the music does the heavy lifting. First Heat is a great track, and it feels just right for a city at night. It's a big part of why this is my go-to level to just kinda skate around and vibe in. Last, and certainly not least, considering Wayfinder Canal exists, we have Breakneck Exodus. Once Avenge Myself started playing the way it did, a speed highway send-up was pretty much mandatory for me. It's my favorite Sonic stage, it had to happen, and I knew it'd be the finale. The theory was that with 4 levels under my belt, I'd be experienced enough to do the idea justice. The reality was that I did get better at it, but I was also just really exhausted. You gotta understand, by this point I was on day 20 of working on this game, basically non-stop, and considering the target release date was the 22nd, it was pretty obvious that I wasn't gonna make it. So this was probably the hardest stage to make as I was caught between having the highest ambitions and the lowest energy. I ultimately did tough it out, but with some compromises. But not in the first section. That opening area is by far the densest maze of routes in any of the linear stages, with like 6 or 7 intended ways to get to the end, some of which involve launching yourself through an office building. I've got no complaints with how that turned out. Then you have the giant building descent, as per tradition, which I enjoy, even if it doesn't quite have the spectacle of speed highways. The weakest bit is the very end, where I realize that you're going 400 miles an hour after skating down the building, and I just have no idea what to do with that. In my desperate need to have this thing done, I just gave up and made some kind of canal wall ride section, which is fine, but I'd have liked something better. I'd have also liked better with the visuals because the old make everything out of concrete plan really falls apart here. It's just not sufficient for what's supposed to be an actual cityscape, and that's not something that lighting can fix. As always, the soundtrack comes in clutch. Concrete Washing Machine is a stone cold banger, and it saves the presentation from totally falling flat. Man, I am glad I got that soundtrack. And we're done. I mean, not done, there was another day or so of polishing it up, but on September 24th, I released the game on itch.io. For free, links in the description, you can play it right now on PC. Or OUYA. Oh, wait. Right, this was an OUYA game. How'd that go? Well, I mean, it works, right? It functions. The whole game's there, you can play it. It is, by all measures, an OUYA game. Having dropped to 720p 30 FPS with funky tablet GPU rendering, it looks, you know, bad, but, right, it does actually run at 30 FPS. It doesn't like the start of Breakneck Exodus very much, but it holds steady otherwise, which is well beyond what most OUYA games seem to achieve. The downside is that you still have to play it with a controller. This controller, which sucks and makes this a terrible way to play the game, but like, it's the OUYA. Being a bad way to play games is kind of its thing. As for the game itself, I'm actually really happy with how it turned out. Development was a smidge rocky, and this video skipped a whole lot of the boring work that goes into every game, but in the end, I think I ended up with something pretty cool. My younger self would be impressed. So, what now? I mean, other than collapsing into a puddle after crunching for 3 weeks. The obvious question is whether I keep going. I do think this game is worth continuing, so I'm gonna keep working on it and see if I can make it into a proper commercial release. No promises for when that'll come out, but unless something's gone terribly wrong, there should be a Steam page in the description if you want to wishlist it. If I'm making it a full game, there's plenty of work ahead. Ideally, I'd like to have more stages that are not just concrete, and while it's quite polished as far as Game Jam games go, there's a lot of jank to iron out before I'd be willing to slap a price tag on it. I'll keep you posted. One last time before I go, I'd like to shout out Pascal Vandenboss for letting me use Midnight Jungle Type 1.5 in the game and this video. Guy's a real class act, and the album's full of jams. Jams? Oh my god, I forgot about the Game Jam. Oh. Okay, so at the time of recording, voting is still happening, but there's, 3 entries. And one of those is a pre-existing port of an old game kit asset. Count that as you will. Honestly, I don't really know what I was expecting. This is the OUYA in 2024. Of course nobody's making anything for it. I don't really know how to end this video now. This is kind of awkward. Welcome to the Credits Q&A, where my Patreon members send in questions for me to answer. Is what I would say, but none of them actually asked any. But we still have news. You may recall that I had a $368 Steel Battalion bankroller tier. You know, as a joke. Obviously nobody would actually pay for that. Somebody actually paid for that. Legitimately, payment went through, it's in my bank account, whole shebang. So, if you're a Giger, enjoy seeing your giant name emblazoned across the credits for all eternity. And of course, on the Steel Battalion controller. As promised, the Patreon tier has been obliterated and the world is safe once again.